How's it going, everybody? My name is Christopher. This is my dad, Leighton, and this is the Oosthuizen Show. And today we're talking about a hot topic both in our industry, as probably in a lot of other industries as well, as to why training fails. Why do people fail at training with their dog, either if they come to a professional facility or maybe they're doing training at home? Why does training fail? We're going to address that today in a couple different steps, a couple different symptoms on why training might be fail and how you can avoid from failing training with your dog. But first, quick message from our sponsor.
So Partners Dog Training is our sponsor. As you all know, we are a behavioral training school. We do all sorts of fun things. Our daycare program is growing like crazy. We just added a couple of new things, which I'm sure Christopher will talk about here in a second. And I have a fly buzzing around. If you're wondering why I'm waving at this fly, there it is. Anyway, if you ever want to get your dog trained, then come chat with us at Partners. And we've got some things that we are working on right now. One of them being a video. Now the fly is in my face. Can't you leave your pets at home? And we're going to talk a little bit about the video thing later this evening. We've got some video to show you tonight from one of our students about her dog that is not behaving the way he should behave. And we've also got some other video to show you about classes. So
today, like I said, we're going to be talking about the common mistakes that lead to dog training and its failure. And this is something that we see in terms of people that have come to us from maybe doing training before. They haven't gotten the results that they were looking for. Maybe they have worked with a professional trainer. Maybe they tried to do the training by themselves. And really coming to us as a last resort in order to try and get results with their dog and in turn have a happier relationship moving forward. Now, we also see clients that have worked with us and potentially didn't get the results that they want moving forward because they didn't do the repetition and consistency and maintenance needed at home in order to see success with their training and see the results that they were looking for. And so we'll talk a little bit about the mistakes that maybe they made or maybe things that we could have done to reinforce that idea of maintenance and continued education a little bit stronger. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the steps and processes that we take physically with our clients to make sure that they are doing the maintenance at home and really reinforcing the behaviors at home across their entire family, across everyone that's working with the dog in order to have a very consistent and repetitive structure and obedience and foundation with their dog when they do head home, maybe after coming to a camp program with us or after doing private lessons, after doing group classes. And then I think finally we'll talk a little bit about some of the different programs and how they're set up and maybe which ones aid a little bit better to seeing results and why they see results a little bit more effectively in those situations. So where do you want to kind of start? I think maybe talking about some of the common mistakes that maybe other trainers or especially pet parents might make in terms of their dog training.
So probably the most common thing that we come across, and this really applies to everybody. I mean, whenever I travel, when I'm talking to people email us, they're always asking, so we tried this, we did that, and it didn't work, or the dog's still doing what he shouldn't be doing. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about some friends of mine whose dog is struggling at home. She won't be able to join us because she's at work, but she's going to watch it later on, and we'll kind of talk in depth about her dog and why that dog has failed. Actually, her and her boyfriend's dog. But probably the number one reason is people just give up way too easily. So you've got to remember, these things take time. You've got to establish a pattern. You've got to establish some rules. You've got to then work within those rules. And if something's not working, you must be prepared to change it and identify something else. It doesn't matter whether you are, training your dog or learning how to drive or, like in our case, learning how to shoot competitively. I was chatting with a friend of mine today about tennis with Bethany, and she's doing amazingly well right now. And it's like, what makes that actually change? What brings you results? And there's three things that I want to identify. The first thing is you've got to identify how your approach has got to be. You got to look at what your attitude is. Are you prepared to really put the effort in?
Mindset.
Or is this, your mindset, right? Your emotional mindset, shall we say. The second thing is you need to know what the tools are. You need to know how to actually fix that. Obviously, that's where we come in and so forth. And then the third thing is your mental stamina. You've got to be able to stick it out. Don't give up just because, I know it sounds like the same as mental mindset, but it's not really. It's basically, are you prepared to put those extra steps in to get that result that you're looking for? So when your dog doesn't pay attention, it's not a big deal. I mean, I'll give you a personal example. Our little dog, Coco at home, When we first got it, we got it from a client who couldn't keep her anymore because she was just too reactive. She resource guarded too much, and we had to figure out a way for her to work. And every now and again, she relapses back into that behavior again, and we have to kind of reestablish those patterns, go back to basics. Sarah's got a small little dog that sometimes pees in the house, and the dog had been doing really well, but the last little while, maybe because our schedule had changed. So all those things, what changes in your life, schedule changes, employment changes, maybe you're dating somebody different, maybe you've moved premises or moved homes, or you've been traveling a lot. All of those things affect the way your dog thinks. And when you change those things, that changes their pattern. So in our particular case, I've been traveling a lot the last little while I've been competing. Now I've been home more. By being home more, that's established more pressure, and that might be leading to Sarah's little dog basically having some issues and peeing in the house again. So what do? We go back to basics, back to our pattern that we talked about, start creating a dog, and then work it out from there.
Yeah, and just like people, dogs also have bad days as well. And so making sure that you're not falling into the emotional side of training your dog, and maybe feeding into that bad day that your dog might be having, and so ineffectively losing kind of control and setting yourself back even further, rather than just going back to the basics and focusing on obedience, focusing on foundation. Because at the end of the day, that's what's really going to break through those types of moments, is really going back to your default behaviors and working on things that your dog does well, so that way you can progress on more of the difficult behaviors that you're trying to work into your strategy. So I would say, yeah, definitely inconsistency at home is probably the biggest thing that we try to guard against, and that's why we have the camp program set up the way that they are, so that way you can have very strong repetition, very strong consistency over a period of 2-3 weeks, multiple times a day, and a number of behaviors that go into each part of their day, even if they're not working physically with a trainer at that moment. That's a big question that people often ask us is, well, if my dog's just sitting in a kennel or sitting in a crate, that means they're not being trained. Well, it's not quite the same that way, because they're still in that atmosphere, and they can see other dogs being trained, they can see other corrections happening, or if they're starting to act out while they're quote unquote alone, then we're still there to kind of correct those issues and not let them escalate further and feed kind of filter into some of the other behaviors that we're working on at the same time. So that consistency is really, really important.
Play that video for us. So we got a couple of videos we're going to show you this evening, and we're going to start, like I said previously, we're going to start doing more of these videos, but we're going to show you a video of one of the classes in progress. Now, the thing to remember with these classes, and actually hold that for 1 second before you play that. So a couple of days ago, I had a conversation with somebody who had trained the dog, and who had they weren't from in Phoenix. They actually trained somewhere else, and they were struggling because the dog behaves great in class, and then when they take the dog home, the dog doesn't do the things at home. So while as I've told you that, now watch this video, and I'll talk about a couple of things, and then what you've got to be doing at home, and I want you to kind of put yourself in the mind of that person, of what you need to work on and how you need to work on it at home. Nope, wrong one. That one. Okay, so this is a group class that you see. That's one of our senior instructors, Emily, on the left-hand side. This is just some footage that we pulled up. It wasn't specifically done for tonight. But what I wanted to point out to you is the routine of establishing or micromanaging the class, micromanaging what each of the dogs is doing. So in this particular case, the dogs are trained to be at the person's side. They have to stay there. They have to hold that position. Let's roll that again. You know what I just realized as well? Is all the dogs on the left.
Yeah, it's so the way that the video works is actually flips when it gets uploaded into the system. So I'll play it for you again, but just continue talking about what you were mentioning.
The trick is to remember that when we talk about practicing stuff, we actually mean exactly what you're seeing in this video. You're literally going to be walking your dog around your house. You're going to be stopping. You put your dog into a sit position. You can see this guy put his dog into a down position. He pets the dog, rewards the dog. The dog is content holding position. That dog's actually looking around. You see the look. You see him looking back at his parents. This would be a good spot for the guy to give him some kind of a reward. Basically tell him, hey, good job looking at me. Now in that particular case, he wanted the dog to go from a down up to a sit. Now again, I don't really care whether your dog down, sits, heels, etc. Those are just tools to establish control, establish that behavior that you're looking for in the foundation of your dog. So if you contact me and you say to us, hey, my dog is listening great when he's in class, but he's not listening at home, then it means you need to do more of this type of work at home. You can see Emily walking around the class. The dogs are learning to hold position, and we keep our classes really relaxed, really confident. When I say confident, like calm, and where the dogs are learning to develop confidence, the handlers are learning to develop confidence, and so forth.
Yeah, the biggest things about the group classes is at this point the dogs already know these behaviors, and it's really just a matter of reinforcing that training, that mindset,
Right.
and that repetition into the pet parents' minds, so that way they have the tools and they have the education necessary in order to address any issues with their dog in the years to come. Because at the end of the day, we're only going to have 2 or 3 weeks, maybe even less with your dog. You're going to have the next 10 years. And so it's really important for you to know how to address all of those different situations, so that way if they do come up and your dog maybe does regress a little bit, you're able to still handle that effectively and get them back right on the right track.
Okay, let's play that video that was sent to us.
Yeah, so do you want to? So this video is was it a former client? Or
Yes, it's a former client of ours. They did a little bit of training. They haven't done very much training with us, but they've done some basics
with this
with
dog
us.
or a different
Yes,
dog?
with this dog.
Yeah.
And
So they're basically the dog's left at home. She might be out at work, she might be running errands, and the dog has an issue with kind of destructive behavior, which we've talked about in other podcasts before, and you can go back, I'm not sure what episode, but I can look it up as this video is running. So destructive behavior and chewing behavior, and we'll kind of see what this nanny cam is showing with this dog here.
So you can see there's the Dane in the background, the gray dog. We lose that. There we go. There's the dog in the background. He's gnawing on the edge of this couch. Now, this video was shot a little while ago. They have no idea. The dog has no idea that they're filming him. Obviously, this is completely what he is doing. And what's really cool about this video is you literally see that the dog he's like sitting on the back, like the ottoman, and he's got his butt there, and he's kind of just munching away on the edge of the couch, like no care in the world. He hears some sound, looks around, etc. And the part that's important to us here is that he's actually just chewing on that couch because it's just a nice, comfortable thing to chew on. And when I spoke to Melanie, I said to her, the first thing that came to mind is crate the dog. Obviously, don't leave the dog unattended at home. Her boyfriend, Richard, whose dog it is as well, who's a very good friend of ours, he doesn't want to crate the dog, and we're going to have a chat about that and some of the resistance that we have to that. And I understand what he's talking about when he says he doesn't want to crate the dog, because he just feels that that's unkind. I'll come back to that in a second. The next thing I want you to see about this dog is that you notice that there's very little stress going on about him. It's basically he's just chilling out, he's relaxed, he's not like anxious, he's not destroying everything, which is often the case. And that's something to remember, that I was responding to some questions that were sent to me by a group where they had a dog that was highly anxious and was just really super destructive. And I said, well, that dog is creating that dog might not be the right solution because the dog is so anxious. In this particular case, you can see he's really calm. If I had a dog who was highly anxious and was just freaking out about life, etc., that might not be the right solution for that particular dog. Now, let's look at some answers for this. How do we approach this?
Well, and it looks like he's really just bored.
He's just bored, yeah. There's two things. First of all, he's a puppy. There's actually three things. First of all, there's a puppy, a young dog. I forget exactly how old he is. She is. I'm sorry, it's a female. How old she is? Looking through my notes here. I don't think she said. No, she didn't give me the age. But she's probably, I'm going to say around about a year old. Maybe a little less than that. So the first thing is puppies. So puppies are like small children. You can't expect a small child to be able to get around your house and not get into things, not be curious, not be inquisitive, etc. Second thing about this dog is that the dog is just simply bored. But she's looking for something to do, and it just happens to be the couch. When I was talking to Melanie today, and she sent me this video and asked me to chat about it, then she also mentioned that the dog had moved on from the couch and is now attacking or chewing on the carpets. Well, I could have guessed that because that's normal. So if it's not the carpets, it's not the couch, then it's going to be something else. So the trick is you have to get it under control, because it's not the couch that's the problem or the carpet that's the problem. It's the fact that the dog is looking for something to do and just chews on something, whatever is convenient. Okay, so let's look at ways that we can harness or inhibit this behavior. The first approach we're going to have is to reduce the stress. Sorry, I said there were three things. The third thing is that they basically are giving this child a free-for-all in the house, right? Free access, able to get around. There's lots of stuff around the house. There's bedding, there's another couch, there's a thing on the foreground you could see in the shot. And giving the dog all that stuff is really bad news, because he just basically, or she has basically anywhere that she can go after. She can chew on this, they walk across the room, chew on that, etc., etc. People that have shoes where the dog chews up their favorite pair of shoes, actually, let me back off. Let's say the dog just chews on an old pair of sneakers. I love it when I arrive at people's homes and where they have a dog and they say, oh, I gave him this old pair of sneakers because I didn't care about them. I'm like, okay, well, your dog can't distinguish between the old pair of sneakers and the brand new pair of $200 Nikes.
Yeah.
Actually, we don't want to buy Nike. We want to buy Under Armour. And so when you choose your Under Armour shoes, then you're going to be pretty upset about that. And of course, the dog has no idea. So one minute you tell him it's okay to chew on sneakers, the next minute telling him it's not.
And that's definitely a big mistake that I would say that a lot of people that just don't know much about dogs is they confuse. Another big thing is like, oh, well, I'll give my dog a blankie or a toy that's like a stuffed type of animal, and then the dog also chews up the kids' toys and so forth. And they're like, well, I already gave him a toy. Why would he not use that one? And it's really just as simple as that texture, that feeling, that sensation. They can't distinguish between what's yours and what's theirs necessarily. And so that confusing of the dog and what we call a psycho mom or psycho dad is a really common occurrence. And so it's really important to be kind of self-aware of why you're correcting your dog in a particular instance, or why are you rewarding your dog in a particular instance, and how could that potentially confuse your dog and lead them down a path that you didn't necessarily want them to go down, and then even further correcting them because they're going down that path when in fact you set them down that in the first place.
Right. So remember, there's always two ways to approach this. One is to remove the dog from the environment. That's the one that I prefer you do. The second one that Christopher's talking about now is to create a negative association with something. So if you have a dog that is, for instance, chewing up your garden sprinkler system, you can create an inhibitor. You can create a situation where the dog is associates that with something negative. So using an e-collar, or maybe using water, or to basically spray something on it or whatever. Those things all work, but we prefer that you rather just take the dog out of that environment. So I see Richard is actually listening. He just sent me a message now. He says his dog is 9 months, and thanks, Richard, for tuning in. And I got to tell you something. It takes a lot of balls to actually tune in to a show like this when it's your dog that we're picking on, and especially because I'm going to pick on Richard here in a second with this crating thing. So let's address crating and the fears and the concerns that people have it. The first thing to remember is that yes, you are putting your dog inside of an area, you're caging the dog, you're crating the dog, whatever word you want to use, for an extended amount of time. I generally tell people, look, it's the better of two evils. I would prefer not to crate my dog for a long time, but if I have no option, or if I have a dog that's destroying stuff, or a dog that might hurt himself, because we haven't even talked about that yet. What if this dog eats something, eats some underwear or whatever, gets some kind of a blockage, then you've got a problem. You're going to come home and find your dog laying on the floor, and that's not a good situation. So the thing we want to look at is that with crating, it's like denning to a dog. I think you talked about denning earlier on, didn't you? You bring up denning?
Not in this episode. And I actually looked. We haven't actually covered destructive or chewing behavior before in the show, so we can definitely cover that in more depth at another episode. But yeah, crate training and is really a denning behavior for animals.
So
it goes
denning.
Back to their instinct of basically, back to animal instincts of foxes or coyotes and wolves and so forth. They would create like a little den for themselves, and it would be just big enough for them to really back in and squeeze their bodies in, and that's really what they would use to sleep in as coverage over the night. And so what crates do is essentially a similar thing for dogs, where you might not have it as small. You'll have it basically about the size where the dog can stand up and turn around in. Now in some cases you might want to make it a little bit smaller if your dog is starting to potty in the crate, but that's a much different discussion.
Yeah, we'll deal with that separately.
But essentially what you're wanting to establish is a really positive occurrence with that crate, so that way your dog has the chance to go in, and our dogs are trained on it so heavily that a lot of times we'll be sitting out watching TV, the crates will be open, they'll go and just lay in there by themselves with the crate standing open. That's just because that's their space, that's their
actually have a picture of that. I was trying to find the picture here quickly, but unfortunately I can't find it. With Karnak, so one of the things that's real funny is that Karnak, which is my Belgian Mal, he'll actually go into the little dog's crates, and he can barely fit, I would say, half of his body inside that crate, but he loves it. He goes in there and forces it, and he's going in there because he'll bump the crate around, and so he's got absolutely no insecurity about going inside that crate. It doesn't bother him. He loves it. He likes the closeness of it. So let's talk about another couple of things you can do. So if you have a dog that stresses out in the crate, and I don't want to get too into that tonight, I want to talk more about the destructive stuff, but if you have a dog that stresses out, then doing things like giving them a bone, giving them something. And I remember when I say bone, it has to be a bone that's safe, that's not going to harm the dog if you're not there. Giving them something like a Kong. If you take these Kongs, you put peanut butter inside. or cheese and Sprite, the cheese spread, just spray a little bit inside. That keeps the dog occupied. So basically, we're trying to address this boredom side of the dog. Putting music in your house is also sometimes a good idea. I love the camera that Melanie and Richard put inside their house, because that gives them a chance to watch. And boy, cameras nowadays, I mean, we just put in new cameras in our place. We put in these Ring cameras, and they're great. Christopher put them in. I'm sorry, Nest cameras. Christopher put them in, and we had them on our phones within the space of a couple of hours, and we've done a whole bunch of them. So, so going back to the crating thing, so if you don't like a crate, you could try an X-Pen. X-Pen is like a 5-sided or 8-sided panel, a bunch of panels that kind of, I'm trying to think how to describe it, kind of like click together or lock together.
Kind of like
creates
a
round,
like a little fence in a way.
Yeah, it creates like a little round area. Your dog stays inside. Obviously, you got to remember, if you have a large dog, they can jump out of there. But X-Pens work really well for small dogs.
And actually, going back to the video camera thing, so one way to stage your dog, if you want to correct a certain behavior, or if you want to establish something, is actually to use that cam, that maybe that nanny cam or Nest cam, Ring cam, whatever you have in your house, and set your dog up in that, and then maybe wait in the other room with your e-collar if necessary, or some sort of correction method. And then the second that they start going into that behavior, whether it's chewing, whether it's potting, whether it's jumping on the counters, you can actually go in and correct that behavior while they're thinking you're not actually watching. You're watching them on the camera on the phone. And what
from
we
the
actually,
other room.
Yeah, we utilize that quite frequently now that we do have the cameras in place. We can set a dog, say if the dog is trying to break out of a crate, and we're working on crate training with the dog, we can actually set the dog up in a room, watch the camera on our phone, and the second that they start to go to break out the crate, we can correct them with an e-collar and really establish a very strong association to, a negative association to breaking out of the crate and the e-collar. And so that's a really effective way to train.
Just on that though, you want to talk to one of us before you start using an e-collar for breaking out of a crate. There are some complexities, and this is something to remember as well. You know, as we were talking about, in fact, I was writing something earlier on where I was saying that you know, not every dog has the same solution. So sometimes you got to try this, that's not going to work. You try the next thing, that's not going to work. Try the next thing. Also, something like a dog breaking out of a crate. That's a much more complex discussion. You can use knee collar, like Christopher said. We will sometimes do that, but it's very carefully managed. Number one, number two, the instructors are making sure that they get the right association
and the timing
and the right timing.
So do you want to go into timing and the exercise that you use for timing?
Explain.
So the timing where you pretend to give an item. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. So we have this game that we play, and it's a thing that I actually learned at a conference when I was in California. And I didn't like the instructor who was teaching conference, but she showed one thing which I really liked. And what she basically did, if you're watching on this video now, and I know some of you don't have the opportunity to watch the videos, watching on podcasts, I'll explain in a second. So I'm going to take this water bottle I've got in my hand. I'm going to give it to Christopher. Now he knows the game, so he's going to have to play along, but you can test this out. So I'll say, okay, take the water bottle. No. Now the moment he puts his hand out and he has that movement of his hand coming forward, then I'll say no, and I'll stop him with a short, sharp no at that moment, right? So what we're actually creating is the timing of the association of coming forward and timed with the correction no. When I offer the water bottle the next time, he's much more hesitant to take it. And you could test it out on somebody. Take a key or take a phone or take something like that and offer it to them. And the moment they start, now remember, you got to get your timing right. This is the whole purpose of the exercise, is to time it so that as their hand is coming out and they're reaching for it, to tell them no, and then they stop. Now, there's some exceptions to this, unfortunately.
And here's the alternative. So take the drink. No. So now if you get the timing wrong and they've already done the exercise, the behavior, they've taken the item.
I have it already, so the behavior's finished.
Right, exactly. And if you say no at that point, the correction doesn't have any substance to it. It might still be effective in some ways, but most likely your dog's not going to draw that same type of association as if you do it right when they're thinking about it, ideally, or as they're going to do it itself.
So you notice as well, I'm drinking water, and Christopher's drinking tea, sugar, all that stuff, just by the way. So back to this thing. So timing is critical. So when we work on timing, for example, if a dog's chewing on the couch, I could put an e-collar on my dog and watch from another room. And as the dog goes to the couch and puts his mouth on the couch, give him a little nick with the e-collar, then he has an association that touching that couch is negative. I'm not a big fan of training with this, but it does work. The problem that I have with it is that you can't do it with enough objects in your house. So, for example, people like to do this with dogs that are destroying things out in the garden. Dog goes over, tries to rip out the sprinkler system. You give him a nick, you teach him don't touch that sprinkler system. He then walks over to the other side of the garden and tries to pull that sprinkler system out. He doesn't understand that it's the same thing that you're trying to stop, because to him it's a different area, different item, and sure, it's the same sprinkler system, but one's on one side of the property and one's on the other side of the property.
And that's a really good point to make, because another reason why training tends to fail, and a lot of it's due to user error, is a dependency and too much of a reliance on tools, whether it's the positive side and you're too reliant on treats, and so you're essentially bribing or luring your dog into every single thing that they need to do, and the minute that you don't have treats on you, they don't listen anymore. Or if it's on the negative side and you're too reliant on your leash or your collar or your e-collar, and then your dog doesn't listen to you unless they have those certain items on it. So how does a person avoid having too much dependency on a tool specifically, rather than
great question,
reliance on them?
And you guys should know this answer by now. You go back to basics, right? If you're having to rely on a whole bunch of input, or if you're having to rely on a lot of negative, again, talking to a client the other day, and he kept correcting his dog, and I was like, all right, hold on a second. I said, you got to go back to basics. He said, well, my dog knows the basics. I said, well, clearly he doesn't know the basics if you're having to correct him over and over and over and over. He's like, yeah, I guess you're right. I was like, okay, here's how you got to look at this. Roughly a ratio of 4 to 1. So 4 times positive, 1 time negative. If you have to use a correction, that means you need to find something your dog can do correctly for the next 3 or 4 or 5 repetitions. If you're focusing too much on the negative, then eventually your dog will only associate negative with training, which is the last thing that you need. That's where this whole argument comes in that we have in the training industry of what's positive, what's negative. If you go back on my Facebook, if you guys are monitoring, you'll see that a few days ago, Maggie posted a really...
I don't think that it'll show on your main feed. But essentially what the article was about was positive reinforcement or purely positive training versus balanced training, and why some people say that the new science, quote unquote, is purely positive training, and that the old ways, quote unquote, which is balanced or compulsion based training, doesn't work anymore. And again, do you want to give kind of your response in this
right
situation?
So this is a problem, because if I talk about the example that was used in this article was an article written by some professor in California, and they were saying that they don't go home and beat up on their children every night. They don't, when the child does something wrong, smack the child or choke the child or put him in a crate or anything like that. Well, I think that's going to a little extreme. First of all, I mean, if I take Christopher, for example, who's now 22, I think he got spanked like twice in his entire life. And I think they were both when he was, they were both when he was super young. And to be honest, at the time, I wasn't even sure about it. With Alessandra, I don't touch her at all. I can control her because my basics are there. I can say to her, hey, honey, you need to do this or you need to do that. And she understands it. There's almost no time that I have to increase my thing. So does that mean I'm using only purely positive? No. There's negative as well. She's not doing very well at math right now. And so we have to put in a couple of extra pressures on that. She's got to do more reading. She's got to sit next to me when I sit and work at nighttime. She sits next to me, she reads a book, and that's part of her thing. It's just a pattern that is created. That's her time sitting with me, and so therefore it's a positive. And at the same time, I'm getting the training out of it without having to sit there and fight with her. So what would be wrong is if I said to her, okay, if you don't read this book, I'm going to hit you over the head with a book. Well, obviously that would be punishment, and that would teach the child to associate a negative, meaning being hit over the head, with the book. So with dogs, we want to be really careful that we don't adjust the training to being purely negative. That's why people say we don't like negative training. The truth is, I can train a dog for the most part without even using a leash and a collar. That's because I build a relationship with the dog. My instructors build a relationship. A lot of times when I walk onto the training floor and they ask me a question, I'll say, okay, let me see your basics. Let me see your relationship. I want to see that bond between the trainer and the dog. So that's what you need to be working on. And this is not just me sitting feeding you a bunch of crap. This is true exactly the way I would train. I'm completely honest with you guys.
And that goes back to, like I said, there's both dependency on the negative side with, train collars or leashes or e-collars, and also on the positive side, because a lot of people, like I said, use treats as lures and bribes. Just like if you were to say to Alessandra, hey, if you read your book, then I'll take you out and we'll go to an arcade or something like that. Then that might work once or twice, or maybe the times that you do it, but eventually if you don't don't keep up that lure and that bribe, then they'll start to see, well, what's my motivation in this? Rather, if you build a relationship and you use what we call as shaping in the industry, and when she does read her book or when she gets a good result, you give a reward in those instances. Now the reward is a little bit more meaningful to them, and so it is more shaped and sets a stronger precedent in their mind. And the same thing works with dogs as well.
That's a really good way to describe it. You did that very well. I want to mention one other thing. Richard sent me a message earlier on. He said now that the couch is already chewed up, he's made some hot pepper spray that's been keeping her from putting her mouth on anything. So again, that will work in the short term, but you must remember we said there are 3 things that are wrong here, right? The first one is that the dog has access to all this stuff. So even when the dog doesn't want to go to the couch, Richard, that dog's going to go find something else. And the next time, I actually told Melanie today, because she said you didn't want to crate her dog, I said, well, I'll tell you what, take out one of Richard's gun bags and leave it laying around, let the dog chew that up and destroy the gun, and then Richard will be much more motivated to crate his dog.
And that comes down to like the 5th mistake that we talk about here, which is lacking a lot of confidence and courage in your convictions of training. So if you only do things lukewarm, if you only do things halfway, they're not going to be effective in the way that in the results that you're seeking. So you really have to make that commitment to put the time in, to do the obedience, to do the foundation, to maybe do things that might feel uncomfortable to you, but is the right thing for both your dog and for your relationship in the long term. Because at the end of the day, if you don't, like, probably the biggest deterrent that people have to bringing their dog and leaving them here for camp is, oh, I don't want to be away from my dog for 2 or 3 weeks, or I'm afraid that he's going to miss me, or I'm afraid that he's going to forget about me. Well, those things are they're not reality. It's all just in your mind, and that's not what we
dogs
see
don't forget you, I
thousands
promise.
of times.
I know of dogs that have not seen their owners for years. The owner walks through the door, dog runs up to him, oh gee, I know who you are, and they recognize him instantly.
But if you do have that lack of kind of confidence and lack of commitment in the training, then inevitably you'll end up having a poor relationship with your dog, you'll end up resenting him, and eventually that's not going to be successful for you guys in the long term anyways.
Now Richard and them are really into their dog.
And I'm not saying this for Richard.
They're pretty keen on it, but obviously we want to try and stop this because it becomes very expensive. And for those of you who say, well, I'm going to basically find the dog another home, just remember that doesn't fix itself. So basically the dog is going to go to another location and the same thing's going to happen. So let's try and get this under control now and fix it now. Something I wanted to bring up before we forget, because we're going to wrap up here in a minute or two. So sending us videos. We want to try this for a little while. I posted it earlier today. I kind of left it to the last minute. We were going to talk about how dogs fail, and I was like, let me see if I can chat about a couple of videos. And Melanie got her video in first, so she was the one that we chose. But if you guys have videos of your dogs misbehaving or things that are happening, if they're a video that's maybe like a minute or 2 minutes long, something like that we can easily show and address, feel free to send them in. If you don't want me using your name or identifying who you are, that's fine. Just tell me. It doesn't make any difference to us, and then we'll chat about them. And then one last thing I want to mention about Richard that I saw the comment is that just see that he writes here, problem is when she's got the e-collar on, then she's perfect. She'll know that they'll light her up. So here's the thing.
That's too much reliance on the
too much reliance on equipment. So that means that the dog is identifying, I can't do this when you guys are around. But obviously most of these problems are occurring when you're not around. That's where we really need it. We haven't quite reached the point where we can sit on a remote control camera and trigger an e-collar from there. But again, I want to emphasize the e-collar is not the solution. The solution is to build up the dog's behavior while you're there. One more thing on that crating thing. If you have a dog that is resistant to going in their crate or that doesn't want to go in the crate, get in the habit of feeding them in their crate, giving them a treat when they're in the crate. Don't bother closing the door. Just put them in their crate while you're sitting watching TV. They can lay there and watch you guys, and that way you'll build up that dog's comfort level of being inside their crates. We crate dogs here at the school on and off all the time. Obviously, they're big kennels that they sleep in and they run around in the exercise areas during the day. But if we want to manage that dog better and focus the dog's time better, where, like Christopher talked about earlier on, we use a thing called modeling. That's where the dogs basically are crated. They watch the person that's trained, the trainer that's training another dog. That way they learn to read what the other dog is doing. They see that it's a positive, and then when they come out of their crate, they're much more focused. When they're finished training, we'll put them back into a crate. And Richard says, I grew up with boxing, we crated all of them. Then what the heck am I talking about all this crating for, bud? I think you and I need to have a chat. Maybe tomorrow, give me a call. Anyway, I think we've explained this system enough. Send us your videos. Let us know what you think. If you like this approach, I will be honest. I got this approach from copying somebody else in the shooting industry because I think it's a great idea and I think it's something that you guys will benefit from. But we obviously need some of your videos, and we look forward to seeing what we can do.
Yeah, so just to kind of recap, again, the common mistakes that people make is confusing their dogs, so not having consistency in their training. 2, depending on equipment, whether it's positive or negative too much. 3, poor timing, so that goes a little bit back to the consistency. And 4 or 5 is a lack of commitment or confidence and conviction in their training, and making sure to commit to it 100%, or it could lead to failure.
Good job.
So thanks very much, guys. We appreciate you tuning in. It's going to be
what do
the
we
same
do
time
next Wednesday? What are we talking about?
So next Wednesday, we're going to be talking about agility. So we're going to have some videos of agility training. We're also implementing more agility type training in our daycare, so we'll take some videos of that, and it should be a pretty fun episode.
Yeah, now on that agility thing, let me just explain. Even if you're not interested in going out and doing agility with your dog, that doesn't matter. We're looking at agility as a way of occupying our dog's mind, giving them something to do, and focusing the attention on. We use it a lot here at the school. And we're going to show you guys some of the techniques that we use that allow us to captivate the dog more effectively and to condition them to working for us, but using the agility at the same time.
Definitely. All right. Thanks so much, guys. I hope you have a great night. And
Scott,
we'll see you
Scott is
next
chirping
week.
us. What's Scott saying?
There's no, because you say idea. He said there's no R in idea.
God,
and it's because
seriously,
your accent
dude,
says idea.
you're on your honeymoon, not your honeymoon. He's on his anniversary. So you're on your anniversary. So go enjoy your anniversary with your beautiful young wife that you've got there.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Cheers.